and welcome. You're with Headlines Today. I'm Rukmani Vishwanath. The countdown has begun to the Union Budget 2013-2014. All eyes are on the Finance Minister P. Chidambaram as he gets set to unveil what many hope will be measures to revive a slack economy and also ease some of the price pressures on the common man and ease some of the burden of taxes that is being felt. Now, who has been the best finance minister for India? Business Today polled 98 top Indian corporate honchos and came up with some interesting results. Joining us in the studio for some perspective on these results are Rajiv Kumar, economist, former DG FICCI, joins us in our Noida studio. Mr. Kumar, thank you for joining us. Gurcharan Das, author, columnist and economic affairs expert, joins us from Bombay. Lower Parel and Devender Sharma, agriculture policy expert, joins us from Chandigarh. Also with us in the studio, Rohit Saran, editor-at-large, Analytics and Digital, India Today Group, and Sanjeev Shankaran, senior editor, Business Today. Very good afternoon to all of you gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us today. Let me start by taking you through the first question of the opinion poll. The question that was posed to the top corporate honchos was, whom would you trust the most in a crisis? Now clearly Dr. Manmohan Singh, it seems, still enjoys the trust of corporate India. If we can just pull up those graphics for you, 33% of those polled voted for Dr. Manmohan Singh. Pranab Mukherjee got 29% of the votes, while P. Chidambaram comes in third with 24% of the votes. Yashwant Sinha gets about 12%. Jaswant Singh got 1%. Well, let me start our discussion with that, Mr. Kumar. If I can come to you first on that question. Why do you think Chidambaram has scored poorly as compared to his contemporaries as far as the issue of trust concerns? I mean, when he presented the dream budget, he actually fronted a coalition government.
I'm actually very surprised at this result, I must confess, because for Pranab Mukherjee to get a higher percentage, a higher ranking than Mr. Chidambaram is actually surprising, given what happened in the last budget, with the retrospective tax and with the GAR and all of that. I was in FICCI then, and I know that he was seen as somebody who's not very trusted by the corporate world because of what he had done. And in fact, there was a clear impression that Mr. Mukherjee is creating unnecessary uncertainty in the investment climate by the actions that he has taken. About Dr. Manmohan Singh, the trust is there because he was considered as the breakthrough finance minister, and people still remember him very more fondly as a finance minister than remember him as a prime minister. So that's why I think they are giving him the benefit of the doubt. The only thing that I want to add is that I think Yashwant Sinha not being trusted is just simply short memories rather than anything else.
Right. In fact, Sanjeev, we were talking about that some time back. Will history have remembered Yashwant Sinha differently had he got to present the budget in 1991, because he was responsible for a lot of the building blocks that Manmohan Singh capitalized on? He ended up only presenting the interim budget.
I think so. I think if he had a chance to present the full budget, we probably would, the results of the poll would be very different today. Because it was when Chandrasekhar was the Prime Minister and I think he was the Finance Minister, that what must have been politically a very difficult decision to pledge gold in England to get the IMF loan was taken. I guess it's just being somebody who just didn't have enough luck at that point in time, which has led to this judgment.
Rohit, very quickly your thoughts on this. Chidambaram was the first Finance Minister, in fact, who was an FM in a coalition government. What are your thoughts on that?
Right, and the only Finance Minister considered to have presented a dream budget. I think on Chidambaram, perhaps the people have not been able to distinguish between predictability and trustworthiness. I mean, what is said of partly correctly, partly incorrectly, is that you cannot always predict Mr. Chidambaram's moves as well as you could probably predict other finance ministers' moves. He always has a little bit of surprises built into his budget, which you have to wait till the budget day. So I think it's that reputation rather than actually his reformist credentials.
Right. In fact, let's move on to our next poll question, and I could go across to our guests on that one as well. Who has been the most growth-oriented finance minister? That was the question posed. In this particular question, you get Manmohan Singh taking away 42% of the votes. Chidambaram gets 37% of the votes. Pranab Mukherjee 10%, Yashwant Sinha 6%, and Jaswant Singh gets about 5%. Let me go across to Devender Sharma on this one. Devender Sharma, are you surprised by the fact that it seems that Manmohan Singh still gets voted as the most growth-oriented finance minister at a time when he is Prime Minister? You have seen UPA put a frittered away one of the best advantages it had in the economy. It started off on a very robust economy, and now we're seeing growth slacken to one of the slowest in over a decade.
Well, first of all, I think the survey itself is one-sided, because you're only talking about the corporates, and corporates love this term of growth because it provides them all the benefits. But I would have expected a survey which looks at growth from the perspective of the 99% which is not included in this entire debate. And when you say Manmohan Singh, I think why people are trying to support Manmohan Singh is obviously because he has been the kind of an anchor for this entire growth paradigm that the country has been progressing, whether it is Chidambaram or later, or even Jaswant Singh, when you were talking about the Shining India. I suppose it was primarily because Manmohan Singh has been the architect and continues to have faith in growth.
Right.
That I think is the reason. But yeah.
Right. Rohit, let me come to you on that. When Chidambaram took over as finance minister for the UPA, he said that he is the minister of investment and he does not want to be called the finance minister. Do you think he lives up to that adage?
Yes, and on this particular question, I think like it happens in all surveys, perceptions and realities get mixed up. So if you just look at the record of growth, just the GDP numbers, with his doings and without his doings, the maximum growth rate, the highest growth rate with consecutive years was under Mr. Chidambaram's finance ministership. But yes, I mean, Dr. Manmohan Singh is being seen globally and in India as the grandfather of reforms, whose shadow is there through the economy all through the years except the NDA years. So that's the distinction that gets meshed up in who was the most growth oriented, and I think as Professor Kumar said earlier, that I think it's surprising to see how less credit has been given to the finance ministers of NDA government, who actually built, and I'm sure the jury will bear me out, on the building blocks of some of the growth rates that UPA government later on consumed. But unfortunately, they have been rated very well.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Let me in fact toss that one to Gurcharan Das, who's with us. Mr. Das, what is your reading of this poll? Do you think Yashwant Sinha has got a raw deal like our panelists here think as well? And also, do you think it's ironic that Manmohan Singh is being rated highest for growth at a time when we're seeing under his regime as Prime Minister, growth slackened to the lowest in a decade?
Right. Well, there are two questions there, and one, of course, is absolutely correct. I think the NDA years set the stage in some ways. Well, actually, reforms have been an incremental process, and all governments after 91 kept reforming until 2004. And so the 2004 onwards, the UPA government enjoyed the benefits of all the reforms that had been done in the previous 12 years. And that's the right way to look at it. And I think also the other point is that Pranab Mukherjee inherited some of the problems that were created by Mr. Chidambaram. So we underrate those problems and we blame Pranab Mukherjee. And with regard to Manmohan Singh, I think we should also remember that strength of Manmohan Singh's first reform budgets after 91 really lay with Narasimha Rao. The support that he strongly gave really made it possible. And that possibly explains why after 2004, and when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, the reforms did not happen because he got no support. The man on his own is not a doer.
Right. Mr. Kumar, if I can come back to you on that one. Manmohan Singh is still seen as a visionary for Indian reforms. He changed the course of Indian economy. But do you think his personality has changed as his responsibilities changed from finance minister to prime minister?
I don't know what has happened, but the fact is that he has not been able to give the kind of leadership, the kind of thrust, the kind of initiative that was needed for our country to continue with the reform process after 2004. And and Gurcharan is just right that since there's been a huge hiatus of reforms from 2004 to now September 2012, and that's 8 years, very precious 8 years lost. And I think to that extent, I just don't know why these corporate honchos who have voted the way they have see both Mr. Manmohan Singh and Mr. Chidambaram as being growth oriented, because if you look at 2004 to 2009 or so, the entire emphasis was on raising consumption and not doing very much for raising investment, and which is what we are now paying for. See, because that's the farm debt waivers, the Neregas, the huge hikes in JNRUM, etc., was done on the basis that you keep pumping up demand and the rest will follow, without as much as a thought to increasing capacity, improving investment climate,
Right.
which is what we are now seeing in a sort of very sticky inflation and growth plummeting and investment sentiment turning very sour. So I think what, as I said, I'm surprised, and what we need now, from hence going forward for this budget and onwards, is just those steps which will improve the investment climate,
Right. It's very
and not just focus on consumption, because the country cannot afford that.
right. You made a very relevant point. I mean, there's a lot being said about government expenditure. Let's take a look at that question, which was put forth. Who best kept a check on wasteful government expenditure? 38% believe that it was Dr. Manmohan Singh. 28% felt it was P. Chidambaram. 17% felt it was Pranab Mukherjee, 11% for Yashwant Sinha, and 4% for Jaswant Singh. Now, let's also pull up that graphic for you, where a lot of these schemes that you just mentioned by many have been considered perhaps having allocations without really factoring in what the total cost would be to the exchequer. We are talking about various schemes like Manrega, we're talking about various other schemes, the food security bill, amongst other things. Let me go to Devendra Sharma on that one. Devendra, do you think that it is unfair to call a lot of this expenditure for these development oriented schemes as being wasteful expenditure? Is it not an issue of implementation not being as effective as it should have been?
Well, I have seen that whenever we provide the funds for social programs, it's always dubbed as a wasteful expenditure. So we're not surprised, but when the allocation was made for Narega and also for the loan waivers, 74,000 crores eventually, there was all talk of they're wasting money, but I think all the finance minister of this country have been indulging in wasteful expenditure, because they are the ones who have been exempting the corporates for the taxes, and this is under the revenue foregone category. So I think from 2004 2005 till today, we have had approximately 27 lakh crores being given away to the corporates as tax exemption, which I think is completely wasteful expenditure and should have been curbed. Despite we have been told by some of the corporate houses that this is not wasteful expenditure. I know that, but the fact of the matter is it is wasteful expenditure. It hasn't turned out into any benefit for the country, and except it has strengthened the bottom line of the corporates. So I think the finance ministers have been very kind to throw the money
but Devendra, that figure is just not right.
This is wrong.
Right,
Devendra, that figure is just not right. This has been bandied about so much, is 27 lakh crores. Please look at that table which is contained in the budget papers about revenue foregone, and you will see, and I've written articles on that 85 to 88% of that revenue foregone is, for example, lower taxes on necessities. It's on export taxes which are not charged, because nowhere in the world do you export taxes. To say that the government has exempted 27 lakh crores of the corporate is just not the right thing to do, because that's what
let me answer that. Let me answer that. You have done a paper justifying the corporate. Your entire work is to justify the corporate. So I'm not surprised by looking at that.
Why is my entire work to justify the corporate?
There is no reason. No, we have seen that debate, entire discussions. The fact of the matter is, when you give something to the poor of the country, including the food bill, everyone is up in arms. As if we are wasting expenditure. But where is the advantage of that expenditure which went into corporates as tax exemptions? The exports are down, the manufacturing is down, the industry is down, everything is down. And what are we trying to say that it benefits?
All right. Let me in fact get in a word. Let me get in a word from Gurcharan Das, who's trying to come in here and make a point. Mr. Das, what are your views on this? Is it really wasteful expenditure that we are talking about here? What do you think?
Well, it comes down to whether you teach someone to fish or whether you give them fish. And if you just give people fish, then you don't create a sustainable economy which becomes self-generating. When you build a road, there's a very recent study. When you build a road, the benefits last for years and years in terms of jobs and that it creates and the factories that come around that road. A recent study has just come out by the World Bank which has assessed the golden quadrilateral from 2001 to 2007, and they have shown a massive gain for the country in terms of manufacturing, in terms of productivity, in terms of labor employment within 10 kilometers of the golden quadrilateral. So this is the difference. When you give people food and if you give them subsidies, these are just for the day. But when you build roads and schools and healthcare, those things last for a lifetime.
That's a fair point.
And that is where, and I think the biggest mistake, if you ask me, the biggest mistake made by people like Manmohan Singh, Chidambaram and the reformers was that they did not counter the rubbish argument of the left, which traded off growth with equity.
Right.
That there is no trade-off. Growth inevitably eventually results in equity. And so we forgot growth, and that's what we are paying for today.
All right, let me
And today, the reason, if I may finish,
right.
If
Simply,
today
I'd like to
the
answer
reason
this.
that people think that the reforms are just help the rich, they have not been able. The reformers did not distinguish between being pro-market and pro-business. Pro-market means you create a competitive economy, and that which helps lower costs, which helps raise the quality of products, and leads to a rules-based capitalism. Pro-business means you keep the controls in the hands of netas and babus, and this leads to crony capitalism. Now, this is the basic distinction that was not made, and this is why we are in this mess today. And therefore, it's much better for the country to do what China did, which was to build infrastructure rather than give away cheap food, cheap energy, give away cheap free power to farmers, loan waivers. Loan waivers, you know, that is morally just such a bad thing to do. You're giving a signal that I do not respect people who obey, keep their promises. What a terrible thing this has done for the morals of our country.
Fair point, Gurcharan Das. In fact, before I come to you, Devendra Sharma, let me toss that to Rohit once again. Much has been said about the government not being able to find the balance between populism and pragmatism. Once again, in the upcoming budget, there is talk that it will go populist. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so one simple, you said about Mr. Chidambaram saying I'm a minister for investment. There's another phrase that he used in one of his budgets under UPA where he said that outlays must match outcomes.
Right.
He came up in the first or second budgets in the UPA, and this wasteful expenditure we are talking about, I think it's not so much about the size and where you spend, how you spend. Right. So we all know what's happening with something like 70 to 80% of the money that is being spent on these schemes. If it were to go to the beneficiary that is intended to, I don't think anybody will cry. Also, I don't know, I'm just going by what Devendra just now said. I don't think the argument is really about you are helping farmers to deny something to industry or helping industry to deny. It's not either or argument. I mean, industries don't work in their factories, right? Somebody else comes and works. So if you're expanding that, you are helping everybody. Such as if farmers' income grow, industry benefits go to demand. So I don't think it's an either or argument really to be made that you are giving tax ops to industry and not to the farmers. It never happens that way anyway. So I think.
Yeah, but you know, the point is clear. If you had spent 70,000 crore in debt waiver, which creates a moral hazard in the economy, because then that gives an incentive to everybody to say that I don't want to pay my debt because it will be a debt waiver. Instead, if that 70,000 had been spent in improving rural infrastructure, improving irrigation, getting better rural electrification or better rural housing, can there be an argument that wouldn't have been a better way to spend that money? And that's what, and I take quite an exception to what Mr. Sharma has said, Dr. Sharma has said, that I write for the corporate world, etc. There is an article I would like to be refuted that tax revenue foregone, and unfortunately even Dr. Amartya Sen has cited that figure. That tax revenue foregone figure is completely a wrong figure because it doesn't go to the corporates, and he must look at those figures before he says anything. So the point is that by spending money to increasing entitlements does not mean that you are empowering the people.
Right.
And what you have to do in a poor economy like us is to empower the people, do things to improve their productivity, and their income generating capacity rather than only induce higher consumption.
Right. Let me in fact get in a word from Sanjeev on this. Sanjeev, a lot has been said about populism versus pragmatism, especially as regards the food security bill. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree with Rohit. It's not an either-or situation. It's a choice of any government to spend where they want to, subject to whatever other constraints that they have. That they have to pay off interest and past debt and so on. We probably need to be revisiting this subject more in terms of how you spend the money. Can you get more out of it? Can you get more out of every rupee you spend? Because I'm given to understand from some of the officials in Finance Ministry that almost a third of the food subsidy bill really goes towards administrative costs. Can we do better? Can we get more food actually into the hands of people who deserve by streamlining your administration? Probably that's where you need to focus instead of making it an either-or situation.
Okay, let me get in a quick word from Devendra Sharma because he had a lot to say on this subject. It seems the perception is really that it's more about the implementation which does not really happen despite the fact that such huge outlays are earmarked.
And despite him saying that I'll match.
Well, I'm not surprised at what we are, at the level of discussion. But my point here is the implementation is, of course, we can all blame that. Nobody says we should not improve implementation. But let's look at it. The moment the corporates don't get the benefits from the state, they all start shouting that it is policy paralysis. But tell me, since the independence till today, we have about 320 million people going to bed hungry. Food is rotting in this country, and yet 320 million people go to hungry. Did we ever mention the point that this is policy paralysis? Isn't it policy paralysis when people are living in hunger or dying of hunger? But nobody talked about it. The moment corporates don't get the benefits, everybody's up in arms saying that, oh my God, we must allow FDI and retail, and they're all for benefit of the country, and so on and so forth. That is the point I want to make. You cannot be biased against the 99% of the country by dubbing it as they are the only beneficiaries or recipient of this support or doles. They are not beneficiaries of doles. You better tune it in a manner that the benefit can be taken of them, taken out of that. And I think that nobody is close to that. But another point I want to say is this feeling that you invest more in roads and infrastructure is a World Bank argument for Europe also. It tells us that hold on please, if you allow me to speak, complete my sentence. The World Bank argument is that subsidies should be diverted into rural infrastructure that is better for the country's economy. And my question to them is, if this is true, then why is Europe, which has rural infrastructure in place, providing the maximum subsidies in the world? They have no answer for this. They only tell us something and ask there's something else for America.
Alright, Devendra Sharma, we take your point, but the whole argument here is it's not an either-or situation, it's about finding the right balance. Alright, let me start with Mr. Kumar there. Did Dr. Manmohan Singh leave more in the pocket for the household? And what about Chidambaram? There are a lot of people who say that he hits you without you even knowing it.
Well, that's not entirely true, because in his first stint, remember in the budget, I think 96 or 97, I forget when, his was the dream budget because it's kind of rationalized the tax slab, and it had brought down the sort of highest rate of taxation. It had raised the exemption limit, etc. also. So I mean that's what, when the disposable income was the highest. So I think Chidambaram had done that, and I think it was since his time that you got this some degree of certainty and stability in the tax rates as well. Dr. Manmohan Singh unfortunately was in no position to improve the taxpayers' lot because his was budget under tremendous pressure because the fiscal deficit is very high, which is the pressure today Mr. Chidambaram would face in the current budget when he rises on the 20th of February, because he has to bring down the fiscal deficit by a huge amount. And what I'm hearing about this tax on the super rich is, I think, is something that at least I have not supported, simply because the tax net can be hugely widened. At the moment 33 million, 35 million taxpayers, and I think the number can be actually almost doubled, and then the tax net to be widened. And also the very rich farmers which are there, I don't see why they should still remain out of the tax net. So I think to say that Dr. Manmohan Singh was the kindest is probably not fair, but let me again reiterate that Yashwant Sinha is getting much less credit even on this account than what I would have given. And so I'm not a little but very surprised at that sort of ranking that he's got.
Right. Rohit, let me get you on this. Chidambaram has a way of getting at you without imposing any new taxes. So people have been more charitable to him than he probably deserves. Like the case of cash withdrawals and so on. I mean, he tightens the net, he widens the net. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, he has imposed, he started with minimum alternative tax, then he had securities transaction tax, and so on and so forth. You're right. I mean, so I think people think of tax and reply to this question, and they don't think of many other things that government finds a way of hitting us fairly so. I mean, government needs revenues to run. But there is also a question of as Raj just now said, is that how quickly can you widen the tax base? Good thing about an UPA full 9 years or 10 years that this UPA is that tax base actually on its own has widened considerably. And one tax that proves it more than any other tax is the service tax.
Right.
Now, service tax revenues have given more than like 4 times in just 10 years. And that's purely because of the way, the consumption patterns have changed, and of course the tax has been imposed on so many more services. So there is a lot of robustness in the economy, and government revenues show that. The tragedy of and the sadness is that it's like running a company which has had the best revenue and highest profit growth years, and yet is starved for cash because he just spends.
Right.
He said he's the Minister of Investment, but he turned out to be Minister for Spending or something like that.
Yes, in fact, let me ask this one to Devendra Sharma. Devendra Sharma, do you think the super rich should be taxed?
Well, there is no reason why they should be taxed. And I remember when Chidambaram presented that dream budget, and I was on various television shows that day, the corporate honchos give them 10 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10, and so on, which I couldn't fathom then. But now I understand that it was basically because they were exempted. Now, the fact of the matter is, yes, we need to widen the tax base, we need to be rationalizing tax base, all those things are okay. But I don't understand why should government defer GAR? The expectation was that something around 80 to 90 billion rupees would flow in through GAR, and that is something which we must have, which we should have done it, as Pranab Mukherjee had promised. And I think this exemption itself clearly shows that there are all kinds of exemptions being thrown at the face of the corporates, and we want to tax the Aam Aadmi by imposing a still higher service tax. This is unfair, and I think the 40% that somebody has recommended, C. Rangarajan, I think is excellent idea, and we must do it as quickly as possible. But also bring in things like GAR to also be compensate or to additional, get a revenue from taxes.
Can I come in here? About the service tax. You see, the service tax revenues have gone up, but they still contribute about, I think, 12% of total tax revenues, while the service sector contributes 60% of GDP. So we are nowhere near what the service sector tax potential is. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, see, the rich pay the tax, and they should be paying the tax, of course. But to keep hiking up the interest rate, let's not forget that there is a tendency to go, like in Morarji Desai's time, to 97% incremental tax. But that's always very attractive, a very tempting thing. But that should be resisted, because whether we like it or not, it is the rich which have higher savings and higher investment. And those are necessary for growth. And without growth, there is no redemption for this economy or this country at all.
That's a very valid point. Gurcharan Das, what are your thoughts? Before I come back to you, Devendra Sharma, once again, Gurcharan Das, your thoughts on should the rich be taxed, plus a lot of expectations this time from Chidambaram on rationalizing taxes for the Aam Aadmi. What do you think is the way forward?
Well, can I answer your first question before I answer your second question?
Please.
Your first question was, who was the most friendly finance minister to the people? And nobody, I'm surprised, talked about the tax administration. The way to be kind to the taxpayer is to have a fair, transparent mechanism, a rules-based mechanism for collecting tax. India's tax department has a very bad reputation for this reason. And that's why a lot of people don't want to, they would be very happy to pay a tax in India. And they don't pay it because they are just scared that once you get into the net, then there will be demands on you of all kinds. And here, I think, probably more than anybody else, it was when Jaswant Singh and later Yashwant Sinha, but they brought in Vijay Kelkar. And Vijay Kelkar's report on indirect taxes, and which the first part which was implemented, and now the second part is GST. This is going to be really a landmark for the country because it will improve compliance, it will lower prices, it will raise revenues, and it will improve the process. And also, believe me, that it was at that time that the TIN, which is the Tax Information Network, which is computerizing the tax returns, also took place. So actually, the people who have voted in this poll have voted without really thinking very deeply about what constitutes in friendliness to the taxpayer. Now, as to your second question about taxing the rich, we have just seen the case of France, where France instituted a tax on the super rich. People earning over 1 million euros were going to be taxed 75%. You know what has happened with that? That there is news, and The Economist also had a piece, that a lot of the rich in France are now planning to leave France and move to Belgium, to the UK, and all the neighboring countries. Now, we don't want that.
Right.
But the main thing is, if we get GST, if we get a rules-based tax administration,
Right.
we will widen the tax net, and that is a much more sustainable way to raise taxes and also be friendly to the taxpayer.
All right. Fair point, Gurcharandas. Devendra Sharma, you were trying to make a point.
Yeah, this feeling that the rich are bringing in investment, so they should be allowed a little more relaxation in taxes. I think it looks very nice, but if you look at this country, all these exemptions that we have given them, including the revenue for all exemptions we given them. I was reading a document which says till March in 2012, the rich were actually sitting over a cash reserve of 9 lakh crores, and they are not bringing it out. Now, whereas the finance minister is telling the public sector undertakings who are sitting over cash reserves of 2.5 lakh crores to take it out, otherwise I'll take it away. Why can't you? Why? Or how will the hoarding of the cash by the rich help the country? They are not investing in the country.
Okay, we take a point.
The answer to that, Dr. Sharma, is very straightforward. We need to improve the investment climate. Today, according to the World Bank's Doing Business survey, India ranks 136 out of 180 countries in doing business, and that's unless we remove the uncertainty from this climate, the private sector, you can't force the private sector to invest, and thank God for that. Otherwise, you have to nationalize the whole economy all over again. But let me just give you one other number, which is that about the tax net. India has 250 million households approximately, out of which 35 million are paying tax today. 30 million are poor, or 40 million are poor, and another 30 million are below the tax net, let us assume. That still leaves 30 million households, which are outside the tax net, which should be in there. And if you do that, your tax revenues can swell to the amount that you'll be able to reduce indirect taxation, which, by the way, is the most unfriendly thing for a taxpayer, which we don't notice. Because everybody talks about direct taxation. But you've got a 33% indirect tax incidence in this country, while China has 17. That hurts the poor the most, which you don't even take care of.
One very quick question from Sanjeev. Sanjeev, one of the reasons perhaps coming back to the poll that Chidambaram scored poorly as compared to his contemporaries on this front is because he's a very successful corporate lawyer and deals with taxes, so he knows really how to plug the loopholes as far as corporates are concerned.
Yeah, actually I find Chidambaram the most interesting in terms of an approach to taxation out of the people that we poll. Because he's got, when people talk about Chidambaram, they remember the 97 budget. But if you look at his first stint as finance minister and his second stint, the common thread is that he's tried very hard to actually increase the effective rate of taxation and plug loopholes.
Right.
The 97, the so-called dream budget, was only about the headline rate, but actually companies pay effective rate of taxation is far lower than that. It's between 24 and 25% today. Because just before the dream budget, he had another budget where he introduced something called minimum alternate tax, which survives to this day. In his second budget in UPA 1, he introduced something called fringe benefits tax, which was a very unpopular one because the compliance cost was very high. But when he introduced that, he didn't say that I'm introducing a new tax. He said you should be paying this. I'm obliged to call it by a new name.
Okay.
So, I mean, I find his approach to be a lawyer's approach, and it's a very interesting approach.
All right. Let's in fact take the last question. Of course, the last question was, who do you think has been the best finance minister for India since 1991? 42% of those polled believe it was P. Chidambaram. Surprising because Manmohan Singh really scored really well in all the other parameters. 30% voted for Dr. Manmohan Singh, 11% voted for Pranab Mukherjee, 12% Yashwant Sinha, and 5% for Jaswant Singh. Gurcharan Das, let me come to you first on this. What is your takeaway from this poll, considering that Manmohan Singh seems to have done in so many well in other parameters like trust, managing growth, etc. Why is it that Chidambaram is considered the best finance minister?
Yeah, I mean, that is a bit of a surprise. And I would just say, yeah, if I had to vote, I would have voted for Manmohan Singh, but Manmohan Singh backed by Narasimha Rao. That was the real Manmohan Singh. And after that, as I mentioned, every government did incremental, slow reforms. And we don't give enough credit to the finance ministers who participated in that process. The reforms actually really came to an end after 2004. So it's really, you've got to ask yourself how these same people, I don't think polls are important here or popularity, these same people stopped reforming. Manmohan Singh, Chidambaram, this was supposed to be a dream team that we had with Montague as well over there, and they just stopped the process.
That's a
of
very good
reforming.
point,
They got
Gurcharan Das.
caught.
In fact, we are a little short on time. Let me take a quick comment from Rajiv Kumar on that. The same people, as Gurcharan Das was saying, have stopped reforming.
Yeah, and this is why I'm surprised at the very high ratings that both those people have got, because that just shows that the people continue to give them the benefit of the doubt, and hope that they will come up with better budgets this time. And really, the coming budget is such a critical one that I hope Mr. Chidambaram rises up to the expectations that this poll has put on him and gives us a real budget which is growth oriented and will take India forward in a much better way.
Right, Devendra Sharma, when Obama won the Nobel Prize, a lot of people said that it was an aspirational value. Is this an aspirational value that we are seeing? Chidambaram being the best finance minister, being rated the best finance minister by corporates?
Well, I'm not surprised, but if you allow me to say, I think the best finance minister for this country are actually the credit rating agencies, Standard & Poor and Moody, because the finance minister actually works to please them. So I think it is the credit rating agencies which decides what should be the financial policy or financial budget of this country. Well, so I would give marks to them.
Rohit, does the finance minister have much choice at a time when the international investment climate is such that, whatever ratings these international agencies come up with does impact inflows into the country?
Yeah, but that's the reality of that question is much less than what is projected out to be. Of course, finance ministers have lots that they can do. So the problem is really within their own governments. Can the NAC, can Mrs. Gandhi's backing can really let them do what they want to, and that's really the real pressure or real maneuvering that they have to do. And I think as Rajesh just now said, I think that in the rating, the credentials are speaking louder than their actions.
Right.
Because if the actions were to be actually counted, I think NDA finance ministers would have gone higher rating. I'm not saying at the expense of these, but they would have definitely got. But they really did some unpopular reforms like privatization, interest rate deregulation, and so on.
Absolutely.
All right. Totally short of time, but Sanjeev, quick takeaways from this opinion poll. Why do you think Chidambaram has been rated so well as compared to Manmohan Singh, who's done well on all the other parameters?
It's very I don't think the respondents really thought things through, or maybe public memory is short or the respondents' memory is short, because Yashwant Sinha should have got a much higher rating, because the difficulty, the circumstances in which he operated were not easy at all.
Right.
There was an Asian currency crisis, there were sanctions because of those nuclear detonations, and he pretty much laid the building blocks of what we saw subsequent decade.
Right, okay, I think that seems to be the consensus there, that Yashwant Sinha got a raw deal in this poll, and perhaps history should have remembered him a little differently. I'd like to thank my guests at this point in time for joining us in this discussion. Gurcharan Das, Devendra Sharma, Rajiv Kumar, Rohit Saran and Sanjeev Chakran. Thanks very much for talking to us and giving us your perspective on this opinion poll. Well, it seems that P. Chidambaram has been rated as the best finance minister. Will he really deliver for the common man and for the country and the economy in the upcoming budget remains to be seen. Thank you for watching.